The first thing I heard after waking up in the hospital was a nurse whispering my name. "Mrs. Adams, your daughter left 2 days ago." I stared at her, certain I had heard her wrong. Emily had brought me to the emergency room after my chest pains. She held my hand while the doctors rushed me inside. She promised she would be waiting when I woke up, but my phone was silent. No missed calls. No messages. Then the nurse quietly closed my door and lowered her voice. "Mrs. Adams, I don't think your daughter left because she was busy. I think she's trying to take your house." At 67 years old, lying alone in a hospital bed, I suddenly realized that the person I trusted most in the world might have been waiting for me to disappear. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you loved, I'd truly like to hear your story. Please leave a comment and tell me how this opening makes you feel. And if you're listening tonight, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Your messages remind me that none of us are completely alone. If stories like mine speak to your heart, please like and subscribe so we can continue this journey together. Before my daughter left me alone in that hospital room, before a nurse quietly warned me that my own child might be trying to take my house, my life had become very small. At 67 years old, my world consisted of a white, 2-story house in Dayton, Ohio, a small vegetable garden in the backyard, and the memories of my husband that seemed to live inside every room. My husband, Harold Adams, died 8 years ago. Sometimes it still feels impossible to say those words. Harold and I had been married for 43 years. We met when I was 19 and working part-time at the local library. He was a young mechanic who always smelled faintly of motor oil and peppermint gum. He wasn't rich. Neither of us was, but we built a life. We bought our house in 1986 when interest rates were high and money was tight. The mortgage payment scared us every month. Harold worked overtime at the garage. I eventually became a full-time librarian at the public library downtown. Every room in that house carried part of our story. The scratch on the kitchen floor where Emily dropped her bicycle. The marks on the wall measuring her height every birthday. The oak tree Harold planted the day she started kindergarten. After Harold died from a sudden stroke, the house became more than property. It became the last place where I still felt married. Every morning, I still made coffee in his favorite mug. Every Sunday, I watered the flowers he planted. Some people told me to sell the house. "You don't need all that space. It's too much work. You should move into a condo." But leaving felt like losing Harold all over again. My daughter Emily used to understand that. When Harold first died, she visited almost every weekend. She brought groceries. She helped me clean the gutters. We sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee and crying together. Back then, I believed we had survived the worst thing a family could survive. I was wrong. Emily was 33 when she married Jason Carter. At first, I liked him. He spoke confidently. He dressed well. He called me Mom after only 3 months. He talked about business opportunities and investment plans. Harold had once told me, "Be careful of men who always talk about money." I wish I had listened. Jason owned a small construction company that seemed successful from the outside. He drove a nice truck and wore expensive watches. But over time, I noticed that he rarely discussed anything except money. Property values, investments, loans, equity, taxes. The first uncomfortable conversation happened about 2 years after their wedding. Jason sat in my living room looking around the house. "You know Morgan houses around here are worth a fortune now." I smiled. "I suppose they are." He leaned back. "This place could probably sell for $400,000. I laughed. "I don't plan on going anywhere." Emily quickly changed the subject. But after that, similar conversations kept appearing. Emily would ask, "Mom, have you updated your will?" Or, "Mom, do you know where your deed is?" Or, "Mom, what happens to the house someday?" At first I thought she was simply being responsible. She was my daughter. Why would I question her? One Sunday afternoon, she helped me organize paperwork in my office. She picked up a folder. "Is this the house paperwork?" I nodded. She seemed unusually interested. "Do you keep everything here?" I smiled. "Mostly." "Do you have copies somewhere else?" I remember feeling slightly uncomfortable. "Why are you asking?" She shrugged. "I just worry about you." At the time, that answer satisfied me. Now it chills me. After Harold died, I had received a modest life insurance payment. Most of it stayed in savings because I was careful with money. My pension from the library covered my bills. I wasn't wealthy, but I was stable. Emily and Jason, however, seemed to struggle more each year. Jason's business had problems. He changed jobs twice. They refinanced their home. Emily occasionally mentioned credit card debt. One Christmas, I overheard them arguing in my kitchen. Jason said quietly, "Your mother is sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars." Emily replied, "Stop it." He answered, "I'm just being realistic." When they realized I had entered the room, both became silent. I pretended not to hear. Looking back, I think I spent years pretending not to hear many things. Last spring, Jason made another comment. We were sitting outside on my porch. He looked around the yard. "This place is way too much work for one person." I smiled. "I manage." "But for how long?" The question bothered me. "For as long as God lets me." He nodded. "Nursing communities are nice these days." I laughed politely. "I'm not ready for that." He looked directly at me. "You may not get to decide someday." The sentence lasted only a moment, but it stayed with me. Emily later told me he was only concerned about my health. I wanted to believe her. I always wanted to believe her. As months passed, Emily began calling more frequently, not to ask how I felt, not to talk about my grandchildren, not to share stories. Instead, she asked practical questions. "Do you still drive? Have you fallen recently? Are you remembering your medications? Do you ever forget things?" At the time, I assumed she was worried. Now I understand she may have been measuring something, testing something, building a picture. One evening while washing dishes, I found myself standing at the kitchen window where Harold used to stand. I could almost hear his voice. He always said, "Morgan, trust people, but keep your eyes open." I hadn't kept my eyes open. Perhaps grief had made me vulnerable. Perhaps loneliness had made me blind. The truth is that after Harold died, Emily became the center of my world. She was my only child, my family. The person I believed would someday protect me the way I had protected her. I never imagined I would become something else, a responsibility, a burden, an obstacle. About 3 weeks before I ended up in the hospital, Emily came over for dinner. She seemed nervous. Jason stayed in the car. She pushed food around her plate. Finally, she said, "Mom, have you ever considered putting my name on the house?" I nearly dropped my fork. "What?" "Just for convenience." "Convenience for who?" She looked away. "If something happened to you." I laughed softly. "Nothing is happening to me." She forced a smile. "You never know." That night, after she left, I walked through every room of my house. I touched the banister Harold built. I looked at our wedding photograph. I sat in his old chair. For the first time in years, I felt afraid inside my own home. I told myself I was imagining things, that my daughter loved me, that families asked difficult questions sometimes, that I was being foolish. But as I stood in my kitchen listening to the old clock Harold had repaired decades ago, I remember feeling something I couldn't explain. It felt like a storm approaching. and somehow, without understanding why, I whispered into the empty room, "Harold, I think something is wrong." The pain hit me without warning. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a tight pressure in my chest while I was folding laundry in the living room. I remember pausing, one hand still gripping a towel, wondering if I had simply stood up too fast. But within minutes, the pressure became something heavier, something that spread into my shoulder and down my arm like a slow burning tide. I sat down on the edge of the couch, told myself to breathe in, out, but the air didn't feel like it was reaching where it needed to go. That was when I called Emily. My daughter answered on the second ring. "Mom, what's wrong?" My voice was weaker than I expected. "Something's wrong with my chest." There was a sharp pause. Then her tone changed instantly. "I'm coming. Stay where you are." Within 20 minutes, I heard tires on gravel. Jason's truck pulled into the driveway first, followed by Emily's car right behind it. For a moment, relief washed over me so strongly I almost cried. My daughter was here. Everything would be fine. But the moment Emily stepped inside, I noticed something strange. She didn't rush to me first. She didn't touch my face or hold my hand. Instead, her eyes scanned the room. Not me. The house. "Mom, where are your insurance papers?" she asked quickly. I blinked. What? Jason walked in behind her, already looking around like he was evaluating something. "We need to go to the hospital," Emily said, but she was already opening drawers near the kitchen counter. "I'll get my purse," I said slowly. "No," she replied sharply. "Just come on." Her urgency felt real, but something about it felt directed elsewhere. Jason leaned against the wall. "Is this pain constant, or on and off? I think it's let's not waste time," Emily interrupted. "We should go now." Within minutes, they were helping me into the car. I expected Emily to sit beside me in the back seat. Instead, she rode in front with Jason. And I remember sitting alone in the back seat, my hand pressed against my chest, watching her through the rearview mirror. She was on her phone, typing, talking, not looking back. At that moment, I told myself I was being paranoid. Fear makes everything strange, but the hospital ride felt longer than it should have. And the conversation inside the car, I will never forget it. Jason said, "We need to make sure she doesn't refuse treatment later." Emily replied, "She won't." "Does she still have everything in her name?" "I'm working on it." I froze. My hand slowly lowered from my chest. Working on it. Emily turned, slightly noticing my reflection in the mirror. She forced a smile. "We're just talking about paperwork, Mom." "Don't worry." But I wasn't confused anymore. I was listening differently now. We arrived at St. Mary's Hospital in Dayton just after sunset. The emergency room was bright, sterile, almost too calm compared to the storm building inside my chest. Doctors moved quickly after seeing me. Monitors, wires, questions I could barely answer. And through it all, Emily stayed close, but not in the way a daughter should. She stayed close to the desk, close to the forms, close to the conversations I couldn't hear clearly. At one point, I remember hearing a nurse ask her, "Are you the power of attorney?" Emily hesitated, then said, "Not yet, but I should be." Those words hit me harder than the pain in my chest. Not yet. The doctors took me back for tests. Before they wheeled me away, I reached for Emily's hand. She squeezed mine quickly. Too quickly. "I'll be right here," she said. But she didn't look at me when she said it. I remember staring at the ceiling lights as I was pushed down the hallway, thinking something is not right. Hours passed. Tests. Monitors. Sleep that came in broken pieces. When I finally woke up in the hospital room, the first thing I noticed was silence. No Emily. no Jason. Just the steady beep of machines. I pressed the call button. A nurse came in. She stepped out. The nurse said casually, "Did she say when she'll be back?" She didn't say. Something inside me tightened. Emily never left without telling me. Never. Not when I was sick. Not when I needed her. Not even when I was just getting a cold. The hours stretched. Then a full day. Then another night. On the second morning, I asked again, "Has my daughter come back?" The nurse checked the chart. No visitors listed since admission night. My mouth went dry. "No, that's not possible." But it was written in ink. No visitors, no check-ins, no signatures. It was as if Emily had brought me to the hospital, placed me inside, and disappeared from my life the moment the doors closed. That afternoon, a different nurse came in. Her name tag read, Rachel Bennett. She was younger than the others. Her eyes, however, were not. They looked like someone who had seen things she couldn't forget. She closed the door behind her, not casually, carefully. Then she pulled a chair closer to my bed. "Mrs. Adams," she said softly, "I need to ask you something important." I nodded slowly. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Did your daughter mention anything about your house?" My breath caught. My fingers tightened around the blanket. "My house," I repeated. Rachel nodded. "She brought documents here. She said you were confused. She said you might not be able to make decisions soon." My heart began to race. "That's not true," I said quickly. "I'm not confused. I know exactly what's going on." Rachel studied my face carefully. "I believe you," she said. Then she added something that made the room feel colder. "But someone is trying to get legal control over your property while you're hospitalized." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The machines around me beeped steadily, almost mocking how unstable my world had become. "My daughter wouldn't do that," I whispered. But even as I said it, my voice sounded uncertain. Rachel leaned closer. "I've seen cases like this before," she said. "And I need you to be very careful who you trust when they come back. When they come back. Not if. When." That night, I lay awake, staring at the hospital ceiling. Every sound in the hallway made me flinch. Every shadow outside my door felt like a decision being made without me. And for the first time in my life, I realized something terrifying. I was not safe in the place where I was supposed to be cared for. And my daughter was no longer just missing. She was part of something I didn't yet understand. The silence in the hospital room didn't feel like rest. It felt like abandonment. At first, I kept telling myself that Emily would come back any minute, that she had simply stepped out to grab coffee or make a phone call or talk to the doctors in the hallway. But as the hours passed, that explanation began to fall apart. By the second day, I had memorized every sound in the corridor outside my room. The rolling of carts, the distant intercom announcements, the soft footsteps of nurses changing shifts. None of them belonged to my daughter. I pressed the call button more times than I could count. Finally, a nurse entered, smiling politely. "Good morning, Mrs. Adams. How are you feeling today?" "My daughter," I said quickly. "Has she come back?" "Emily? Adams?" She glanced at the chart on her clipboard. "No one has been listed as visiting you since your admission night." The words didn't make sense at first. "That's not possible," I said. "She brought me here. She was right here with me." The nurse's smile faded slightly. "I'm sorry, but there is no record of any visitor after you were admitted." A cold weight settled in my stomach. I looked toward the empty chair beside my bed. Emily had sat there. I was certain of it. Jason had stood by the window. I remembered it too clearly for it to be imagined. "Maybe there's a mistake," I whispered. But even as I said it, I felt something inside me shift, something fragile breaking. Later that afternoon, a different nurse came in with my medication. She was older, quieter, and avoided eye contact. When I asked again about Emily, she hesitated, then said, "Sometimes family members don't stay when things get complicated." Her tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't comforting either. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's face in the car mirror. Her hands moving quickly over documents, her attention drifting away from me, even when I was struggling to breathe. At one point, I sat up in bed and tried calling her myself. Straight to voicemail. Jason too. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. By morning, panic had replaced confusion. Something was wrong. Not just emotionally, legally. I could feel it. On the third day, I finally met someone who would change everything. She entered my room without knocking, gently closing the door behind her. Her name tag read Rachel Bennett. She was younger than most of the staff, maybe mid-30s, with tired eyes that looked like they had seen too much. She pulled a chair close to my bed, but didn't sit immediately. Instead, she studied me carefully. "Mrs. Adams," she said softly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." My throat tightened. "Of course. Did your daughter bring any legal paperwork here when she admitted you?" My pulse jumped. "I don't know," I said. She was talking to the front desk. I was in pain." Rachel nodded slowly, as if she expected that answer. "She did," she said. My heart began to beat faster. "What kind of paperwork?" Rachel glanced toward the door before speaking again. "Power of attorney documents, medical decision authority forms, and something related to property ownership." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "My house?" I asked. Rachel didn't answer immediately. That silence was enough. My hands began to shake. I didn't sign anything I said quickly. I didn't agree to anything. "I believe you," she said firmly. "But someone is trying to establish that you are mentally unfit to make decisions." The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. "That's insane," I whispered. "I'm not confused. I know exactly where I am." Rachel leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Adams, I need you to listen carefully. Your daughter told hospital staff you have signs of cognitive decline. She said you forget conversations, that you may not be safe living alone." Each sentence felt like a hammer strike. "Emily said that." "About me?" "I raised her," I said quietly. "I gave her everything." Rachel's expression softened, but her voice remained steady. "I understand, but I've seen situations like this before. And when property is involved, things can escalate quickly." "Property?" The word made my stomach twist. "This isn't about property," I said. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure anymore. Rachel opened a folder she had brought with her. Inside were copies of documents. I recognized my name immediately. Morgan Adams, but the signatures below it. My breath caught. "That is not my signature," I said instantly. Rachel nodded. "I thought you might say that." I stared at the paper, my hands trembling. Emily's handwriting was familiar. But this wasn't Emily's handwriting. It was something worse. It was intent. "I need you to understand something," Rachel said quietly. "Once these documents are processed, your daughter could legally make decisions about your care and potentially your assets." My chest tightened so hard, I thought the pain would return. But I didn't agree. I said again. Rachel closed the folder. Then we need to stop it before it goes any further. That night, I lay awake again. But this time, the fear was different. It wasn't just emotional. It was strategic. Someone wasn't just ignoring me. They were replacing me. My identity, my decisions, my life. And I had no idea when it had started or how far it had already gone. On the fourth morning, a hospital administrator came to my room. He introduced himself politely, too politely. "We just need a quick confirmation regarding your discharge plan," he said. "I'm not being discharged," I replied. He smiled slightly. "Your daughter has requested transfer to a long-term care facility." The world tilted. "I haven't agreed to that." He glanced at his tablet. "It appears she has legal authority." My mouth went dry. "That's not possible." He paused, then added almost casually, "It's already in motion." After he left, I sat in silence for a long time. My hands rested on the blanket, but I couldn't feel them. Everything I thought was stable. My home, my independence, my relationship with my daughter was being pulled out from under me while I lay in a hospital bed, unable to stop it. That evening, Rachel returned. She closed the door immediately, more firmly this time. "They're moving fast," she said. "Who is?" Rachel hesitated. "Your daughter and her husband. There's paperwork being submitted to transfer you to a care facility within the week." "A week? That means I lose my house," I said quietly. Rachel didn't answer directly, but she didn't have to. I looked out the window of my hospital room. The sky outside was calm, unbothered, like none of this was happening. Inside me, something hardened. Not anger, not yet. Something deeper, clarity. For the first time since Harold died, I understood something I had refused to see. This wasn't confusion. This was a plan. And I was not going to be passive in it anymore, even if I had to fight from a hospital bed. The first thing I noticed about Rachel Bennett was that she didn't move like the other nurses. She didn't rush. She didn't pretend. And she didn't smile unless she meant it. She came into my room late in the afternoon, closing the door behind her, with a quiet click that immediately made the space feel more private, more serious. "I've been assigned to your case today," she said gently. I studied her face. "Assigned by who?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Administration?" she replied, but her eyes shifted slightly when she said it. Something about her felt different from everyone else I had seen since I woke up in that hospital bed. Careful, controlled, alert. She pulled a chair closer and sat down, not across the room like most staff did, but right beside me. "I need to ask you something," she said softly. "And I need you to think carefully before you answer." My stomach tightened again. "Okay," I whispered. She lowered her voice. "Did your daughter bring any legal documents with her when she admitted you?" My mind immediately flashed back to the car ride, to Emily's hands moving too quickly over papers, to Jason standing in the background, watching everything like it mattered more than I did. "I don't know," I said slowly. "There was paperwork. She said it was hospital forms." To Jason standing in the background, watching everything like it mattered more than I did. "I don't know," I said slowly. "There was paperwork. She said it was hospital forms." Rachel nodded once like she expected that answer. Then she said the words I wasn't prepared for. They weren't just hospital forms. A cold wave moved through my chest. "What do you mean?" Rachel opened a thin folder she had been carrying. Inside were photocopies, blurry but unmistakable in their purpose. My daughter's name is on those, I asked, my voice suddenly small. Rachel didn't answer immediately. That silence told me everything. She submitted documents requesting temporary medical authority over you, Rachel said carefully. And there were additional forms attempting to assign decision-making power over your assets. My breath caught in my throat. My assets. Rachel nodded. That includes your home. For a moment, the room tilted slightly, as if the walls themselves had shifted. That's impossible, I said. I never signed anything like that. I believe you, Rachel replied immediately. But someone is presenting these documents as if you did. My hands began to tremble under the blanket. Emily. My daughter. The word felt heavier now than it ever had in my life. She wouldn't do this, I said instinctively, though my voice lacked conviction. Rachel watched me closely. Mrs. Adams. I've seen cases like this before, she said. When financial pressure is involved, people change how they behave, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. Financial pressure. Jason's face flashed in my memory. His constant talk about money, his comments about the house, the way he looked at it like it was something that could solve a problem. Rachel continued. There's something else you need to understand. The hospital received a formal request yesterday to evaluate your cognitive condition. I frowned. Evaluate me? Yes, she said, to determine whether you are capable of making independent decisions. My chest tightened. I'm not confused, I said quickly. I know exactly where I am. I know exactly what's happening. I know, Rachel said calmly. But that's not what they're trying to establish. I stared at her. Then what are they trying to establish? She leaned forward slightly. That you are not reliable enough to object. The words hit harder than I expected. It wasn't about proving I was incapable. It was about removing my ability to disagree. I looked down at my hands. For 67 years, those hands had signed checks, held my daughter, buried my husband, and built a life inside that house in Dayton. Now someone was trying to tell me they could no longer be trusted. Rachel closed the folder. I need you to listen carefully, she said. There are deadlines involved. If these filings go through, your daughter could gain temporary legal authority within days. Days. Rachel closed the folder. I need you to listen carefully, she said. There are deadlines involved. If these filings go through, your daughter could gain temporary legal authority within days. Days, I repeated. Yes. A silence stretched between us. Outside my room, the hospital continued its usual rhythm announcements, footsteps, distant monitors, but inside, everything felt suspended. What happens to me if that happens? I asked quietly. Rachel didn't avoid the question. You could be transferred to a long-term care facility, she said, and decisions about your property could be made without your consent. My throat tightened painfully. So I lose my home, I whispered. Rachel didn't correct me. That was the answer. For a long moment, I just stared at the ceiling, trying to process how quickly my life had shifted from ordinary illness to something far more deliberate. I raised her, I said finally. My voice cracked slightly. I raised Emily alone after her father died. I worked. I sacrificed. I gave her everything I could. Rachel's expression softened. I believe that, she said, and that's exactly why this feels so hard to accept. I turned my head toward her. What do I do? Rachel hesitated, then spoke more firmly. We document everything, every conversation, every visitor, and we bring in legal support immediately. Legal support. Yes, she said. You need someone outside this hospital who understands property law and elder rights. For the first time in days, something inside me shifted, not fear, Not confusion, but something closer to awareness. If what you're saying is true, I said slowly, then Emily didn't just bring me here because I was sick. Rachel met my eyes. No, she said quietly. She brought you here because it gave her time. The sentence landed like a weight pressing down on my chest. Time. That was the word that suddenly explained everything. The car ride, the paperwork, the phone calls, the urgency that wasn't about my health, but about my absence. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the hallway felt sharper than before. Every beep of the monitor reminded me I was not at home, not safe, not in control. I kept thinking about Emily's face. Not the version I had always known, but the one I saw in the rearview mirror. Focused, detached, measuring something I couldn't yet understand. Around midnight, Rachel returned briefly. She checked my vitals, but then lingered. They may try to visit again tomorrow. Measuring something I couldn't yet understand. Around midnight, Rachel returned briefly. She checked my vitals, but then lingered. They may try to visit again tomorrow, she said. Who? Rachel paused. Your daughter. And possibly her husband. My stomach tightened again. What do I do when they come? Rachel looked at me for a long moment, then said something that stayed with me long after she left the room. Don't let them define your condition for you. After she left, I sat alone in the dark. For the first time, I stopped waiting for Emily to return as my daughter, and started wondering what she would say when she did. Because something inside me had already begun to change. Not into anger, not yet, but into something far more dangerous for them. Clarity. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment I could remember from the past few months, searching for something I had missed. Something small, something obvious, something that would explain how my daughter had turned into a stranger who was now legally maneuvering around me while I lay helpless in a hospital bed. But the more I thought, the more I realized the truth wasn't hidden in one moment. It was hidden in many. Tiny questions, small conversations, things I had dismissed because I trusted her too much to question her intentions. I closed my eyes and saw Emily sitting at my kitchen table 6 months earlier. She had brought coffee, smiling too brightly. Mom, she said casually, do you still have the deed to the house somewhere safe? At the time, I laughed. Of course I do. She nodded almost too quickly. Good, just making sure. I remember thinking she was being responsible. Now I wondered why she needed to know. Another memory surfaced. Jason standing in my hallway, arms crossed, looking at the framed photos of Harold and me. This house must be worth a lot now, he had said. Not a question, a calculation. I had told myself he was just making conversation. But now I understood something I hadn't before. People don't measure things they don't intend to use. By morning, Rachel returned. She looked more tired than before, but her focus was sharper. They've escalated the paperwork, she said without preamble. I sat up immediately. What does that mean? She placed a tablet on my bedside table. It means your daughter has submitted a formal request for emergency guardianship review. The words meant nothing to me at first. Guardianship, I repeated. Yes, Rachel said. They're arguing that you are no longer fully capable of managing your own decisions. My hands curled into fists under the blanket. I had a full conversation with you yesterday, I said firmly. I remember everything. I know exactly where I am. Rachel nodded. I know, but legal systems don't move based on what we know. They move based on what is documented. That word again. Documented. I felt like I was drowning in paper instead of water. What happens if they succeed? I asked quietly. Rachel didn't sugarcoat it. Then you lose decision-making authority over your medical care, your finances, and potentially your property. My chest tightened, and Emily would control that. She would be assigned temporary authority, Rachel said carefully, until a court decides otherwise. A court? My daughter, and me, separated by paperwork I never signed. It felt unreal, but it was happening anyway. I stared out the window for a long time after Rachel left. The sky was pale and empty. No answers there, only distance. That afternoon, a hospital administrator came to my room again. This time, his tone was more formal. "We've scheduled a cognitive evaluation for you," he said. "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning." I nodded slowly, though I didn't agree with anything inside me. After he left, Rachel returned quickly. She looked upset in a way I hadn't seen before. "They're moving faster than expected," she said. "Why?" She hesitated. "Because someone is trying to finalize authority before you have legal representation fully activated." My stomach sank. "So they're rushing it?" "Yes," she said, "and I don't have time." Rachel met my eyes. "You have time?" she corrected, "but not much. And not if you stay passive." That word stayed with me. Passive. I had spent my entire life believing that being calm, patient, and trusting was the right way to live. That family would not turn against you if you loved them enough. Now, I wasn't so sure. That evening, something unexpected happened. A nurse I hadn't seen before entered my room quietly. She looked nervous. She closed the door behind her and spoke in a low voice. "Mrs. Adams." I wasn't supposed to say anything. My heart began to race again. "What is it?" She hesitated, then said, "Your daughter visited administration again today." I nodded slowly. "I know." The nurse shook her head. "No, you don't understand. She wasn't just filing paperwork." My grip tightened on the blanket. "What else?" The nurse glanced toward the door before continuing. "She brought someone with her, a notary." My breath caught. "A notary?" I repeated. "Yes," she said. "They tried to complete additional authorization documents here in the hospital." My stomach dropped. "Without me?" I asked. The nurse nodded. "They said you were resting, that it would be easier if everything was prepared in advance." I felt something sharp and cold rise in my chest. Not grief, not confusion, recognition. This wasn't just about illness anymore. It was about control. And control required structure. Paperwork, witnesses, signatures. People like Jason and Emily weren't improvising. They were organizing. That night, I asked Rachel to sit with me for a while. She agreed. We spoke quietly, almost like conspirators in a place that was supposed to be safe. "I need to understand something," I said. "How far along is this?" Rachel exhaled slowly. "Legally speaking," she said, "they are closer than you think." My stomach tightened. "How close?" She looked at me directly. "If nothing interrupts it, they could initiate transfer proceedings within 72 hours. The words hit me harder than anything before. 72 hours, less than 3 days, to lose my home, my independence, my voice. I looked down at my hands. These hands had held Emily when she was born, had packed her school lunches, had paid for her college books, had comforted her after heartbreaks. And now those same hands were being treated like they belonged, to someone unfit to use them. "Why would she do this?" I whispered. Rachel didn't answer immediately. Then she said quietly, "Sometimes people don't see what they're doing as betrayal. They see it as survival, to someone unfit to use them." "Why would she do this?" I whispered. Rachel didn't answer immediately. Then she said quietly, "Sometimes people don't see what they're doing as betrayal. They see it as survival." Survival. That word made me pause, because suddenly I wasn't sure if Emily saw me as her mother anymore, or as something standing in the way of what she needed. After Rachel left, I stayed awake longer than before, and for the first time, I stopped waiting for things to return to normal. Because something inside me had already accepted the truth, normal was gone. And whatever came next would not be gentle. It would be a fight. Morning came too quickly. In a hospital, time doesn't feel like something you move through. It feels like something that moves through you. I had barely slept. Every hour had been broken into fragments. Hallway footsteps, distant announcements, the soft, mechanical rhythm of machines reminding me I was still alive, even if my life no longer felt like mine. Rachel arrived just after sunrise. She didn't greet me with her usual calm tone this time. Her expression was sharper, more urgent, like she had been awake long before she entered my room. "They filed something overnight," she said immediately. My stomach tightened. "What kind of something?" She placed her tablet on the bedside table and turned the screen toward me. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then the words came into focus. "Emergency guardianship petition, filed under Morgan Adams. Petitioner Emily Carter." My daughter's name sat there like a signature carved into stone. "I don't understand," I whispered. "What does that mean exactly?" Rachel sat down, her voice steady but lower than usual. "It means they are asking a court to declare you temporarily unable to make decisions for yourself." My hands curled under the blanket. "I can make decisions," I said quickly. "I know where I am. I know everything that's happening." "I know," she said gently. "But the court will not decide based only on your awareness today. They will decide based on what your daughter presents as evidence." My heart began to pound harder. "Evidence of what?" Rachel hesitated. "Confusion. Memory lapses. Inability to manage daily life. They are building a narrative that you require legal protection." Legal protection. The phrase felt like a disguise for something else entirely. Control. I looked at her, searching for any indication this might be a misunderstanding, but Rachel didn't look away. That's when I knew this was real. "Emily said I was confused," I asked quietly. Rachel nodded once. "She submitted statements from neighbors' medical forms and a witness affidavit." "A witness?" I repeated. "Yes." My mind immediately went to Jason. There was no doubt in my mind. My chest tightened painfully. "What happens if the court believes her?" I asked. Rachel didn't sugarcoat it. "Then she could be granted temporary authority over your medical decisions, finances, and potentially your property." My breath caught. "My house, too." Rachel paused for just a second too long. "Yes." The room felt smaller than before. The walls closer, the air heavier. Everything I had built with Harold suddenly felt like it was being lifted out from under me, piece by piece, while I lay unable to stop it. I didn't sign anything, I said again, almost desperately. Rachel nodded. "That's why we're here. We still have a window to challenge it. A window before the hearing is finalized." I swallowed hard. When is it 48 hours? 48 hours. It felt unreal. 2 days to defend my entire life. Rachel leaned forward slightly. And there's something else you need to know. My stomach dropped again. What now? She lowered her voice. They've requested a psychological evaluation as part of the hearing preparation. That evaluation can be conducted here in the hospital. My chest tightened. So they're going to test me? Yes. And if I fail? Rachel didn't answer immediately, but she didn't need to. I looked down at my hands again. These hands had signed permission slips for Emily's school. These hands had held her when she cried after her first heartbreak. These hands had buried her father. And now someone was preparing to question whether these hands belonged to a woman capable of making decisions at all. Something inside me shifted. Not panic, not despair. Something colder. Awareness. Rachel stood up. I'm going to contact David Reynolds today, she said. He needs to intervene immediately. Will he believe me? I asked. Rachel looked at me directly. He already knows your history. That's enough. After she left, I sat alone for a long time. The hospital room suddenly felt different than before. Not just a place where I was recovering, a place where I was being contained. That afternoon, a man in a suit arrived. He introduced himself as a court liaison assigned to review the guardianship filing. He smiled politely, too politely. Mrs. Adams, he said, this is a standard procedure. Nothing to be alarmed about. I am alarmed, I replied immediately. He glanced at his tablet. Your daughter has expressed concern about your recent cognitive stability. My daughter hasn't seen me in days, I said sharply. He paused, then said, That's not what is documented. Documented again, that word. I felt like I was being erased by paperwork. He continued, The court is simply ensuring that your well-being is protected. My well-being, I repeated bitterly. Or my property. His smile didn't change. I'm not here to interpret intentions, Mrs. Adams. Of course he wasn't. He was there to read what had already been written. After he left, Rachel returned with a folder that looked heavier than the last. This is what David sent, she said. Inside were property records, financial statements, and copies of the contested documents. And then I saw it. My signature. It looked almost like mine. Almost. But not quite. My hand shook. That's not my signature. Inside were property records, financial statements, and copies of the contested documents. And then I saw it. My signature. It looked almost like mine. Almost. But not quite. My hand shook. That's not my signature, I said firmly. Rachel nodded. I know. Then why does it exist? Rachel hesitated. Because someone needed it to exist. The words made my stomach turn. That evening, something unexpected happened. A soft knock on the door. Rachel opened it slightly, then stepped aside. David Reynolds entered. He looked older than I remembered, but his eyes were sharp-focused in a way that made me feel for the first time in days like I wasn't alone in a sinking ship. Morgan, he said gently. I felt something break in my chest at the sound of my name spoken like that. You're here, I whispered. Of course I am, he replied. Harold would have killed me if I wasn't. That made me almost laugh. Almost. He pulled up a chair. I've reviewed everything he said. And I need to be honest with you. My body tensed immediately. That's never a good sentence. He gave a faint, tired smile. It is not good for them, he corrected. For you, it means we still have a fight. I exhaled slowly. What kind of fight? David leaned forward. Fraud, misrepresentation, and possibly coercion. My stomach tightened again. So it is happening, I said quietly. Yes, he replied, but they made a mistake. I looked at him. What mistake? He tapped the folder lightly. They underestimated how quickly we could respond. For the first time in days, something like hope flickered inside me. Small, but real. David stood. Ill-prepare for the hearing, he said. But Morgan, you need to prepare too. For what? He looked at me directly. For seeing your daughter clearly. After he left, I sat in silence again. But this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy with something I didn't want to name yet. Because deep down, I already knew. In 48 hours, I wouldn't just be defending my house. I would be confronting the daughter I thought I knew. And I was no longer certain which version of her would walk into that room. David's arrival changed the atmosphere of the room immediately. It wasn't just that he looked like a lawyer, carefully pressed suit, steady posture eyes that measured everything in seconds. It was the way people in hospitals reacted when he walked past them in the corridor. Like he belonged in rooms where decisions were made, not rooms where people waited to be saved. He greeted me gently at first. Morgan, he said, pulling up a chair beside my bed. I wish I was here under better circumstances. I tried to smile, but it came out weak. At this point, I said, I'm not sure better circumstances exist anymore. That earned a faint, sympathetic exhale from him. Then his expression shifted. Professional now. Focused. I've reviewed everything Rachel sent me, he said, and I need to be honest with you about where we stand. My body tensed immediately. That phrase again. Honest. Tell me, I said. He placed a thick folder on my lap. Inside were printed documents, highlighted sections, notes in margins, and copies of filings I had never seen before. I'll start with the most important issue, David said. The guardianship petition is scheduled for emergency review in less than 48 hours. I closed my eyes for a second. It felt like the number had been following me. 48 hours. 48 hours to defend my entire existence. When I opened my eyes again, David was still watching me, and he continued, They are pushing a second track at the same time. My stomach tightened. Second track. He nodded. Property transfer validation. The words didn't land immediately. Then they did. Cold. Sharp. Final. They're trying to take my house, I said quietly. David didn't hesitate. Yes. The room went silent except for the soft rhythm of the hospital monitor. I could hear my own heartbeat in a way I didn't want to. How is that even possible? I asked. I didn't sign anything. David opened one of the documents and pointed. This is the deed transfer authorization submitted yesterday. I looked down. My name was there. Morgan Adams. Below it, my supposed signature. I stared at it for a long moment. It looked familiar enough to fool someone who didn't know me well. But I knew my own handwriting the way I knew my own reflection. And this wasn't it. That's not mine, I said immediately. I know, David replied. My hands began to shake again. Then why does it exist? I asked. David leaned back slightly. Because someone created a legal appearance of consent. The word appearance made my skin tighten. So they're forging documents, I said. He paused. Not necessarily in the criminal sense yet, he said carefully, but they are constructing a case that suggests you were capable and willing at the time of signing. I felt something rise in my chest. Anger. Not loud. Not explosive. Controlled. You're telling me my daughter is trying to convince a court I agreed to this while I was in a hospital bed? David didn't answer immediately. That silence said everything. Rachel, who had been standing near the window, finally spoke. She's trying to establish a timeline where your confusion started before admission. I turned toward her sharply. But I wasn't confused. I know, Rachel said. But they're not arguing what you are now. They're arguing what you were before. Before. As if my entire life could be rewritten by selecting the right version of me. David flipped to another page. There's something else he said. I braced myself. The notary listed on the documents is questionable. What does that mean? I asked. It means we can't verify whether they properly witnessed your signature or whether they were present at all. A cold realization settled in my chest. They did this fast, I whispered. David nodded, very fast. Which usually means pressure. My mind immediately went to Jason. Not Emily, Jason. Because I knew my daughter well enough to understand one thing: Emily didn't move like this on her own. There was always someone behind her when she stopped thinking clearly. I closed my eyes again. Memories came uninvited. Jason's voice in my kitchen. This house could solve a lot of problems. Emily asking about my deed. Emily asking about my bank accounts. Emily watching me differently in recent months, not with love, but with concern. That months, not with love, but with concern that felt calculated. When I opened my eyes, David was watching me closely. You're thinking about her? He said quietly. Yes, I admitted. He nodded. That's good. But you need to separate emotion from legal positioning right now. Felt calculated. When I opened my eyes, David was watching me closely. You're thinking about her, he said quietly. Yes, I admitted. He nodded. That's good. But you need to separate emotion from legal positioning right now. Emotion. As if I had a choice. What do? I asked. David leaned forward. We fight it. But we need evidence. Evidence of what capacity? Communication, awareness. Anything that proves you were fully co-impotent during this entire timeline. I exhaled slowly. I've been in a hospital bed. That actually helps, he said. If we can show you were lucid, documented, and in contact with staff, it strengthens your case. Impotent during this entire timeline. I exhaled slowly. I've been in a hospital bed. That actually helps, he said. If we can show you were lucid, documented, and in contact with staff, it strengthens your case. Rachel stepped forward. I've been keeping logs, she said. Medication, times, conversations, visitor attempts, everything. David nodded approvingly. Good. That's exactly what we need. I looked between them. Two people who barely knew me. And yet they were the only ones treating me like I still existed as a person, not a problem to be managed. David, I said quietly, what are my chances? He didn't avoid the question. That depends on what your daughter presents at the hearing. My chest tightened again. So it's her word against mine. Not just words, he corrected. Documentation versus documentation. And credibility of intent. Intent. That word stuck with me. Because intent was exactly what I was beginning to question. Not just theirs. Mine too. Because I realized something uncomfortable. For years, I had interpreted Emily's behavior through love. Now I was being forced to interpret it through structure. Legal structure. And those two things did not always align. David stood up. I'll prepare filings tonight, he said. We'll challenge the guardianship petition and request an emergency injunction on any property transfer. Rachel nodded. I'll make sure the hospital preserves all records. They were both moving with purpose now. Like time was no longer something that passed. It was something that needed to be stopped. Before David left, he paused at the door. Morgan, he said. I looked at him. You need to prepare yourself for tomorrow, he said. For what exactly? For the possibility that she won't come alone? My stomach dropped slightly. What do you mean? He hesitated. Sometimes, in these cases, the person initiating the petition brings support. Witnesses, reinforcement, people who help shape the narrative. Jason. I didn't need him to say it. I already knew. After they left the room, felt heavier than before. Not empty. Occupied. By everything I hadn't wanted to see. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in the hospital bed and listened to the rhythm of machines trying to imagine tomorrow's hearing. Not as a courtroom, but as a collision between two versions of truth. And for the first time since this began, I stopped thinking about what I had lost and started thinking about what I still had left to protect. Because whatever Emily was preparing to say tomorrow, I needed to be ready to answer it. The night before the hearing felt different from all the nights before it. Not quieter, not calmer, but sharper, like the air itself had been tightened, stretched thin enough that any movement could make it snap. Rachel stayed late with me again. She didn't try to comfort me anymore. Not in the way people usually do. There were no soft reassurances, no vague promises that everything would be fine. Instead, she worked. Her laptop was open on the small hospital table. Documents were spread out beside it. Notes, printouts, emails, timestamps, evidence. That's everything we've been able to gather from the hospital system, she said, pointing at the screen. Medication logs, visitor records, and the security access history. I leaned forward slightly. Security access? She nodded. Every person who enters your room is logged. Every request for paperwork. Every administrative access to your file. My stomach tightened. And what does it show? I asked. Rachel paused. That your daughter has been actively involved in your case almost continuously since admission. My breath slowed. Continuously, I repeated. Yes, she said, but not always physically present. That sentence didn't make sense at first. Then she clarified. She's been communicating with administration, submitting forms, and authorizing decisions remotely. My mind tried to process it. While I was unconscious, I asked quietly. Rachel looked at me directly. Yes, a cold wave moved through my chest. It wasn't just abandonment anymore. It was orchestration. She never left. I whispered. She just stopped being here with me. Rachel didn't respond immediately. Then she said softly, in a legal sense, she was still acting as your representative. Representative, not daughter. The word felt wrong in my mouth. Rachel closed the laptop. There's something else, she said. My body tensed immediately. What now? She hesitated just long enough for me to feel it before she spoke. Jason submitted a sworn statement yesterday. I exhaled sharply. I knew it, Rachel continued. He claims you have shown signs of confusion for over a year. My chest tightened. That's not true, I said quickly. I've been managing my own life completely. I know, she replied, but it's now part of the record. Record. Again. That word. As if repetition could turn fiction into fact. Rachel stood up and walked toward the window, as if she needed distance from the documents she had been reviewing. They're building a timeline, she said, piece by piece. Small behaviors interpreted as decline. I shook my head. That's ridiculous. It doesn't have to be accurate. she said quietly. It just has to be believable. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else that night. Believable. Not true. Believable. I looked down at my hands again. I had signed checks with these hands. Held Emily's first tooth when it fell out. Held Harold's hand when he couldn't speak anymore in his final hours. And now those same hands were being questioned as unreliable witnesses to my own life. A knock came on the door. Both Rachel and I turned. A hospital security officer stepped in. He looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Adams," he said politely, "there are visitors scheduled for tomorrow morning before the hearing." My heart tightened. Who, I asked immediately. He glanced at his clipboard. Emily Carter and Jason Carter. Rachel stepped forward. "Is there a time 9 a.m., he said, right before transport to the courthouse. Then he left. The door closed, and suddenly the room felt different again. Not just a space where I was staying, a space where something was about to end. Rachel sat back down slowly. "They're staging it," she said. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means they want to see you before the hearing, to control the emotional narrative." My stomach tightened. Control how family visit before legal proceedings often influences perception, she said carefully. They want you seen as confused, dependent, emotional. I laughed bitterly. "I'm not confused." "I know," she said, "but the court won't be in this room." Silence settled between us. Heavy. Final. After a moment, Rachel leaned forward. "There's something important you need to understand about tomorrow," she said. I nodded slowly. "Tell me." "They will try to make you reactive." I frowned. "Reactive?" "Yes," she said. "Angry, emotional, defensive, anything that can be interpreted as instability." I looked at her carefully. "And what should I do?" Rachel's answer came immediately. "Stay controlled, no matter what they say." I swallowed hard. "That's going to be difficult," I admitted. "I know," she said, "but it's the only way we win this. That word surprised me. For the first time, I wasn't alone in this. After Rachel left, I lay back in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling again. But this time, I wasn't thinking about paperwork. I was thinking about Emily. Not the version of her I had raised, but the version of her that existed now. The one who had filed documents, the one who had spoken to lawyers, the one who had decided I needed to be managed. I tried to find the moment it changed, but there wasn't one. That was the most frightening part. It hadn't been a moment. It had been a direction. Slow, gradual, almost invisible, until it wasn't. At around midnight, I heard footsteps outside my door again. But this time they stopped, not passing by, stopping. I stayed completely still. Then I heard a voice, faint, muffled, but unmistakable. "Jason." "I told you it would work if we moved fast." A pause. Then Emily. "I don't like this." Jason's voice lowered. "It's too late to stop now." Silence. Then Emily again, quieter this time. "She's still my mother." That sentence hit something inside me I hadn't expected. For a moment, I almost believed it. Almost. Then Jason replied, "She's standing between us and everything." Footsteps moved away, and the hallway became quiet again. I lay there in the dark long after they were gone, staring at the ceiling, listening to my own heartbeat. And for the first time since this began, I stopped asking whether I was overreacting and started asking something else entirely. What happens when the people you trust most stop seeing you as family and start seeing you as an obstacle. Tomorrow I would find out. The morning of the hearing arrived without ceremony. No dramatic sunrise. No sense of closure. No moment where the world paused to acknowledge what was about to happen. Just a quiet hospital room, the steady beep of machines, and the knowledge that within hours, my entire life would be argued over by people who weren't me. Rachel arrived early. David followed shortly after. Neither of them said good morning in any meaningful way. There was no space for it. Instead, Rachel placed a small folder on my bedside table. "Everything is ready," she said. "Transport to the courthouse is scheduled in 45 minutes. I nodded slowly, though my hands felt colder than they should have. David stood near the window, reviewing papers one last time. "You'll be brought in via medical transport," he said. "We've already notified the court of your condition, so you'll be allowed to remain seated during the hearing." I almost laughed. Aloud, as if I was asking permission to exist. "What about Emily?" I asked quietly. Rachel exchanged a glance with David. "She's already on her way," Rachel said. A strange feeling moved through me at that moment. Not fear, not anger. Something more complicated. Anticipation. Because for the first time, I would not be waiting for Emily as my daughter. I would be meeting her as an opponent in a system she had chosen. At exactly 8:30 a.m., a knock came at the door. 2 hospital transport workers entered with a wheelchair. The motion felt surreal. I had walked into this hospital, and now I was being rolled out of it like a fragile object. As they moved me through the hallway, I noticed something I hadn't expected. The hospital staff avoided eye contact. Not out of cruelty, out of discomfort. Like they knew I was no longer just a patient. I was a case. Outside, the air hit my face with a coldness that felt almost insulting. The ambulance ride to the courthouse was quiet, except for the occasional radio static. Rachel sat beside me. David followed in another vehicle. No one spoke much. There was nothing left to prepare, only something left to face. When we arrived at the courthouse, the contrast was immediate. The building was old, heavy, permanent. Unlike the hospital, which felt like a place where things changed constantly, this place felt like it remembered everything. Rachel wheeled me through security. David met us inside the hallway. "She's here," he said simply. I felt my pulse change slightly. Not faster, heavier. We entered the waiting room outside the hearing chamber. And then I saw her, Emily, my daughter. She stood near the window, hands clasped tightly together, her posture controlled but tense. For a moment, she didn't notice me. Then she did. Our eyes met, and something in her expression flickered. Not guilt, not relief, something more guarded. Beside her stood Jason, arms crossed, expression calm in a way that felt rehearsed. He nodded slightly when he saw me, not respectful, not hostile, evaluating. Emily took a step forward. "Mom," she said softly. Just that word, Mom. For a second, something inside me almost softened. Almost. Then I remembered the hospital room, the documents, the signatures, the silence. So I didn't move toward her. I simply looked at her and waited. "I didn't want it to come to this," she said quickly. Her voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her. They were shaking slightly now. Rachel stepped closer to my chair, not blocking Emily, but present. David remained behind us watching. Emily continued, "I was trying to help you." That sentence landed differently than she expected. "Help." I finally spoke. "Help me do what Emily—" She hesitated. "To be safe." Jason shifted slightly behind her. "She was confused in the hospital," he added. I turned my eyes to him. I wasn't confused, I said quietly. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he gave a small, polite smile. That's what we're here to determine, he said. Rachel leaned in slightly toward me. Stay steady, she whispered. I nodded once. Emily looked at me again. Her voice softened. Mom, you don't understand how bad things were getting. You were alone all the time. You were alive, I interrupted. The word cut through the space between us. She paused. I continued. I was alive, Emily, in my own home, the home your father built with me. Her expression tightened slightly. Jason spoke again. The house is too large for one person your age. It's not practical. That house is not a discussion, David said sharply for the first time. Everyone turned to him. He stepped forward. It is the subject of legal ownership, he continued. Not convenience. The room shifted. The air changed. Emily's composure cracked slightly. Mom, she said again, softer now. We were trying to protect you. By taking my decisions away, I asked. She hesitated. That's not what this is. It is exactly what this is, Rachel said calmly. Emily turned toward her. You don't know our family. Rachel didn't flinch. I know the paperwork, she replied. That silence was louder than anything else so far. A court officer opened the door then. All parties inside, he called. The hearing was beginning. As I was wheeled forward, Emily stepped aside slightly, but as I passed her, she leaned down just enough for only me to hear. Her voice broke for the first time. I didn't want to lose everything, Mom. I stopped, just for a second. I looked at her, really looked, and I realized something painful. This wasn't just about me, not entirely. There was fear in her eyes, fear I hadn't understood before, but fear does not erase consequence. I didn't respond. I turned forward, and we entered the room. The judge sat at the far end. The world behind me closed, and in front of me, everything I had ever built with my life was about to be questioned. The door to the hearing room closed behind me with a sound that felt final, not loud. Not dramatic, just final. Inside the courtroom was smaller than I expected. Not grand like the ones I had seen in movies, but compact, functional, almost clinical in its arrangement. Everything felt designed to observe record and decide. The judge sat at the far end reviewing documents with a neutral expression that revealed nothing. Rachel stayed close to my right side. David took a seat slightly behind us. And across the room, Emily. She sat beside Jason, her posture straight, but tense hands folded tightly in front of her. When she looked at me, there was something. When she looked at me, there was something different in her eyes now. Not the daughter I remembered. Not entirely. Something more guarded. Like she had already rehearsed losing me. The hearing began with formalities I barely processed. Words like petition different in her eyes now. Not the daughter I remembered. Not entirely. Something more guarded. Like she had already rehearsed losing me. The hearing began with formalities I barely processed. Words like petition, temporary guardianship, and medical capacity floated through the room like distant noise. Then the judge spoke directly. Mrs. Adams, you are here regarding a petition filed by your daughter, Emily Carter, requesting temporary authority over your personal and financial decisions. Do you understand the nature of this hearing? All eyes turned toward me. I took a breath. Yes, I said clearly. I understand. A small pause followed. The judge made a note. Jason shifted slightly beside Emily. Then David stood. Your Honor, he said calmly. We object to the premise of this petition on the grounds of misrepresentation and lack of valid medical evidence supporting incapacity. The judge nodded once. Proceed. Emily's attorney stood next, a man in a gray suit with a practiced voice. Your Honor, the petitioner is acting in good faith based on observed cognitive decline and increasing inability of the respondent to manage her affairs independently. Observed. That word again, as if interpretation had replaced reality. Then he turned slightly toward me. Mrs. Adams has experienced memory lapses, confusion regarding financial matters, and increasing reliance on third parties for basic decision-making. I felt my chest tighten. That's not accurate, I said immediately. Rachel touched my arm lightly, a reminder. Stay steady. I exhaled slowly and forced myself to remain still. The attorney continued. We will present witness testimony and documentation to support the petitioner's concern. Then he sat down, and Emily stood. The room shifted. Even Jason leaned back slightly, letting her take the center. For a moment, she didn't speak. She just looked at me. And I saw it. The conflict. Not just legal, not just strategic. Human. Mom, she said softly. Her voice cracked just slightly on the word. I didn't want this. I felt something tighten in my chest again, but I didn't respond. She continued. You've been alone since Dad died. You refused help. You refused to consider moving somewhere safer, and I was worried about you. Worried. That word again. She stepped forward slightly. I tried talking to you. I tried asking you to let me help manage things, but you kept saying no. I remembered those conversations. Not the way she described them, but differently. Gently. Casually. As questions, not demands. I was trying to protect you, she said. Jason nodded behind her. Yes, he added. We both were. Then Emily said something that changed the temperature in the room. You've been forgetting things, Mom. My body went still. That was the first direct accusation. Not vague, not interpreted, direct. I looked at her. I have not been forgetting things, I said clearly. A murmur moved through the room. Emily's attorney immediately objected, but the judge raised a hand. Let her respond, he said. Silence returned. Emily swallowed. I've seen it, she said. You asked me the same question twice in one day. You forgot conversations we had about the house. Her voice faltered slightly. You are not yourself. Not yourself. I felt something inside me shift. Cold. Focused. Because suddenly, I realized what was happening. This wasn't about truth. It was about framing. If I may, David said, calmly stepping forward. The judge nodded. David opened a folder. Your Honor, we have hospital documentation from the exact period in question. He turned pages deliberately. Medication logs, cognitive assessments, nurse statements, all indicating full orientation and capacity. He paused, and most importantly, recorded conversations where Mrs. Adams demonstrates clear understanding of her environment, her medical condition, and her legal rights. Jason leaned forward slightly. That doesn't prove she was always coherent, he said. David looked at him. No, he replied, but it contradicts the claim that she was consistently impaired. A silence followed. Then Rachel stood. I was assigned to Mrs. Adams' care, she said clearly. I interacted with her daily during her hospitalization. At no point did I observe confusion or inability to make decisions. Emily looked at her. Something flickered in her expression. Recognition. Maybe discomfort. Rachel continued. However, I did observe repeated attempts by third parties to introduce legal documentation without proper consent protocols. Jason shifted in his seat. That detail mattered. The judge noticed. Explain, he said. Rachel nodded. On multiple occasions, hospital administration received external requests to process power of attorney documents while the patient was under medical observation. In one instance, a notary was brought into the facility. A ripple moved through the room. Even the judge looked up slightly. A notary, he repeated. Yes, Rachel said. Under circumstances where the patient was not present for full consent verification, Jason immediately responded. That's standard procedure when a patient is incapacitated. Rachel turned to him. She was not incapacitated. The room tightened again. Emily's attorney quickly interjected. There is no evidence of wrongdoing. But David interrupted. There is sufficient procedural irregularity to question the validity of the entire filing. The judge raised his hand again. Silence. Then he looked at Emily. Miss Carter, he said calmly. Did you authorize any attempt to secure legal control over your mother's property while she was hospitalized? The question landed like a weight. Emily froze. For the first time, she didn't respond immediately. Jason shifted beside her. And in that pause, I saw something I didn't want to see. Not guilt, not innocence, conflict between survival and morality. Finally, she spoke. I was trying to make sure she would be safe, she said again. But this time, it sounded less certain, less rehearsed, more human. The judge leaned back slightly, and I realized something. The hearing wasn't just about my house. It was about whether love could justify control, or whether control, no matter the intention, was still loss. And in that moment, I knew the next words spoken in this room would decide everything. The courtroom felt quieter after Emily's last words. Not because the room had actually changed, but because something in me had. She had said, I didn't want to lose everything, Mom. And for a brief moment, I had almost seen the little girl she once was. But then reality returned. Everything she had done, the documents, the hospital, the timing, was still there unchanged. The judge leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Adams, he said, his voice steady, you have heard the statements made by the petitioner. You may respond. All eyes turned to me again. This time, I didn't feel panic. I felt something else. Stillness. I looked at Emily. Really looked at her. Not as my daughter, but as the person sitting across a legal divide that had already been drawn. I want to say something clearly, I began. My voice surprised even me. It was steadier than I expected. I have lived in my home for over 35 years. I built it with my husband. I raised my daughter in it. I buried my husband from it. And I have managed it alone since the day he passed. The room stayed silent. I did not ask to be removed from it. I did not ask for someone else to make decisions for me. And I did not agree to any of the documents presented here today. I paused slightly, then added, and I am not confused. A faint shift moved through the room. I saw Jason glance at Emily. Emily's jaw tightened. The judge nodded slowly, then turned toward David. Counsel for the respondent. David stood immediately. Your Honor, he said, we submit that the petitioner's case relies heavily on subjective interpretation rather than objective medical evidence. He opened a file. We have hospital records confirming full cognitive orientation. Multiple nurse statements. Medication logs showing consistent comprehension and cooperation. There is no documented medical diagnosis of cognitive impairment. Jason leaned forward again. That doesn't reflect reality in the home environment, he said. David turned toward him. Then provide evidence of that environment. A silence followed. Jason didn't answer immediately. That silence mattered. The judge noticed. Do you have documentation? He asked. Jason shifted slightly. We have witness statements, he said, finally. Rachel immediately spoke up. Your Honor, those statements are from family members with direct financial interest in the outcome. That phrase changed the tone. Financial interest. It reframed everything. The judge made a note. Emily's attorney quickly intervened. Even if financial concerns exist, the central issue remains the respondent's capacity to manage her affairs safely. Then he turned toward me again. Mrs. Adams, can you confirm you understand the nature of your financial assets? Yes, I said immediately. Can you describe them? Yes. Your home. My home is in Dayton, Ohio, owned outright, no mortgage bank accounts. I have one primary savings account and a pension account from my retirement at the library. Do you understand their approximate value? Yes. Each answer was simple, clear, undeniable. The attorney paused slightly. Then how do you explain your daughter's concerns? That question hung in the air longer than the others. I looked at Emily again. This time, I didn't soften my expression. I think my daughter is afraid, I said quietly. Emily's eyes flickered. Jason shifted beside her. I continued, and I think fear can make people do things they wouldn't normally do. Emily's attorney objected immediately. Speculation. But the judge raised a hand. Overruled. The respondent may continue. I exhaled slowly. I am not here to accuse anyone, I said, but I am here to state that I have never been unable to manage my life. Rachel leaned slightly forward behind me. That was my anchor. The attorney for Emily changed direction. Mrs. Adams, he said carefully, are you aware that your daughter has expressed concern about your safety living alone? Yes, I said. And do you acknowledge that accidents can occur at your age? Yes. Then isn't it reasonable that your daughter would want to protect you? The question was structured carefully. Designed. I paused, then answered. Protection is not the same as control. A quiet murmur moved through the courtroom. The judge looked up again. Emily finally spoke. Her voice was softer now. Mom, I wasn't trying to control you. I turned toward her. For a moment, I almost believed she meant it, but then I remembered the hospital, the paperwork, the timing, the urgency. I believe you believe that, I said gently. Her expression tightened, but belief doesn't change what happened. Silence again. Jason spoke more firmly now. She was declining. We had to act quickly. David immediately responded. You had to act, or you chose to act. Jason hesitated, just for a second, but the court noticed. The judge leaned forward. I would like clarification, he said. Jason adjusted his posture. We acted out of concern, he repeated. Rachel spoke quietly beside me. Concern does not require deception, she said. The words landed sharply. Emily's eyes shifted toward Rachel. For the first time, I saw frustration break through her composure. This isn't deception, Emily said quickly. This is family trying to take care of. By submitting documents I did not sign. I interrupted. My voice was calm, not raised, but firm enough that it stopped her mid-sentence. A silence followed. Emily looked at me, and for the first time since this began, her voice softened completely. I didn't want to lose you, she said. The words hit differently now, not as justification, but as confession. I felt something inside me tighten again. Not anger, not entirely, something closer to grief. because in that moment, I understood something I hadn't fully admitted before. This wasn't only about a house. It was about fear. Her fear. And how it had turned into something damaging. But fear does not erase consequences. The judge looked between us, then spoke. I will take a short recess before issuing a preliminary determination regarding the petition. The gavel struck once, final, but nothing about this felt finished. As people began to move, Emily stayed seated. So did I. For a moment, the room emptied around us. Just mother and daughter, separated by something neither of us fully knew how to repair anymore. She looked at me and whispered, "Mom." I didn't think it would go this far. I closed my eyes briefly, because I knew exactly when it had gone too far. It wasn't today. It wasn't in this courtroom. It had started long before either of us realized. And now, we were only seeing the shape of it. The recess didn't feel like a break. It felt like a pause before impact. A moment where everyone in the room stepped back just far enough to prepare for whatever would come next. But no one could actually escape it. Emily stayed in the courtroom. So did Jason. I remained seated as well. No one spoke for a while. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because everything important had already been said in fragments too sharp to ignore. Rachel stood beside me, quietly reviewing notes. David spoke briefly with the court clerk in the hallway, and I sat there staring at my hands again. They no longer felt like just my hands. They felt like evidence. Time passed in an odd way during recess. Not forward, not backward, just suspended. Then I heard footsteps again. Emily had stepped out of the courtroom. She didn't approach immediately. Instead, she stood a few feet away as if unsure whether she had permission to exist in my space without the structure of the courtroom separating us. "Mom," she said softly. I looked up. This time, there was no attorney in front of her. No Jason, no judge, just her. And for a moment, she looked like the daughter I once knew. Tired, conflicted, human. "I didn't expect it to go like this," she said. I didn't respond immediately. Because I believed her. Not in the legal sense, but in the emotional one. "I know," I finally said. Her eyes flickered slightly, as if she wasn't sure whether that answer was better or worse. She took a slow breath. "I wasn't trying to take everything from you," she said. "I was trying to make sure you wouldn't end up alone, or hurt." I studied her carefully. "That's what you told yourself," I said quietly. She flinched slightly at that, not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. Jason appeared in the doorway behind her, watching silently, not interfering, not speaking, just observing. Emily continued, her voice lower now. "Jason kept saying we needed to act quickly, that if we didn't establish authority, the system would decide for us later." There it was, the shift. Not just fear, influence, pressure. I turned my eyes slightly toward Jason. He didn't look away. "I never told her to do anything against her mother," he said calmly. But his tone wasn't defensive. It was controlled, carefully controlled. That told me more than his words did. Rachel stepped closer to me. "Mrs. Adams," she said quietly, "we should return to the courtroom soon." I nodded slightly, but I didn't move immediately, because something important was happening in front of me, something that had nothing to do with legal filings, and everything to do with fracture. Emily stepped closer now, lowering her voice even more. "Mom, I saw the numbers," she said. "The bills, the maintenance, the medical risk if something happened while you were alone. She stopped, struggled. I just didn't know what else to do. For the first time, I saw it clearly. Not manipulation, not cruelty. Fear that had been shaped into action without understanding its consequences. That realization hurt more than anything else so far, because it meant this wasn't simple betrayal. It was something more complicated, something built slowly, silently, over time. I didn't need you to fix my life, I said gently. Emily looked down. I just needed you to talk to me, I added. Silence followed. Jason shifted slightly in the background. Rachel remained still. Emily swallowed hard. I tried, she whispered. No, I said softly. You tried to solve? No, I said softly. You tried to solve it. That distinction landed heavily between us. A few seconds passed. Then David returned, breaking the moment. We're back in 5 minutes, he said. His eyes moved briefly between Emily and me. He understood the weight of what had just happened, but he didn't comment. He didn't need to. Emily stepped back slowly, returning toward Jason. But before she fully turned away, she looked at me one more time, and this time, her voice cracked slightly. I don't want to lose you, she said again. But now, it didn't sound like justification. It sounded like fear of consequence. I nodded once. I know, I said, and I meant it. But knowing didn't undo what had already been set in motion. The courtroom doors opened again. We all returned. The atmosphere inside had changed slightly. The judge looked more focused now. Less passive. Like he had been thinking during the break. Counsel, he said, before we proceed, I want clarification on one issue. Everyone turned toward him. He looked at Emily's attorney first. Is there any direct medical diagnosis supporting incapacity the break? Counsel, he said before we proceed, I want clarification on one issue. Everyone turned toward him. He looked at Emily's attorney first. Is there any direct medical diagnosis supporting incapacity? The attorney hesitated, then answered carefully. No formal diagnosis of dementia or cognitive impairment has been recorded. A pause. The room shifted again. The judge turned toward David. And your position? David stood immediately. Our position is that there is no medical basis for guardianship and that all claims of incapacity are interpretive rather than clinical. The judge nodded slowly, then turned toward Emily. Miss Carter, he said, you are asking this court to override the legal autonomy of your mother. Emily's hands tightened slightly. Yes, she said quietly, and you are doing so without a medical determination of incapacity. A longer pause. Emily didn't respond immediately. Jason leaned slightly forward but said nothing. The judge continued. Then this court must weigh intent against evidence. Silence again. He looked down at the documents in front of him, then spoke again. I am not seeing sufficient grounds for emergency guardianship as it is currently presented. The room shifted, not dramatically, but decisively. Emily's attorney immediately raised objections, but the judge raised a hand. However, he added, this does not dismiss concerns raised regarding family dynamics and financial vulnerability. My heart slowed slightly, then steadied. This wasn't over, but something had changed. The balance had shifted. The judge looked at both sides. I will not grant emergency guardianship at this time. A quiet breath moved through the courtroom. Emily closed her eyes briefly. Jason didn't move. Rachel placed a hand gently on my shoulder. David exhaled slowly. Then the judge continued. I will, however, recommend a formal, independent review of the situation, including financial and familial mediation. The gavel struck once. Not final, but decisive enough. The hearing was adjourned. As people began to stand, I remained seated for a moment longer, because I wasn't thinking about victory or loss. I was thinking about what came after. Emily approached slowly again as the courtroom emptied. This time, there was no urgency in her steps, only exhaustion. She stopped in front of me. Neither of us spoke immediately. Then she said quietly, "I didn't win anything, did I?" I looked at her, and for the first time, I answered honestly, "No," I said softly. "Neither of us did." The gavel fell, but the sound didn't feel like an ending. It felt like something that had been suspended finally touching the ground. The judge's decision hung in the air for a moment longer than anyone seemed ready for. "Emergency guardianship is denied at this time," he had said, and yet the room did not relax, because denial was not victory, it was delay. As people began to shift in their seats, I stayed still. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I was trying to understand what had just changed. Across the room, Emily didn't move at first. Jason leaned slightly toward her, saying something under his breath, but she didn't respond immediately. Her eyes stayed on me, not with anger, not with relief, but with something more complicated: loss. When the courtroom began to empty, Rachel gently touched my shoulder. "We did it," she whispered, but I didn't answer right away, because I wasn't sure what it meant yet. David approached next, his expression measured but firm. "This is a significant step," he said, "but it's not the end." I nodded slowly. "I understand," I said, but my eyes were still on Emily. She finally stood slowly, like someone whose weight had shifted in a direction she didn't expect. Jason spoke first as they gathered their papers. "This isn't over," he said quietly. David met his gaze. "No," he replied, "it isn't." But Jason wasn't looking at him anymore. He was looking at me. And for the first time, I saw something different in his expression. Not confidence, not control, concern. A concern that felt less strategic and more exposed. Emily walked toward me slowly. Rachel didn't stop her. Neither did David. There was no legal reason to, only human ones. When Emily reached my chair, she stopped. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The courtroom noise faded behind us as if the world itself had stepped back. "I didn't win," she said softly. I looked up at her. "No," I said. She swallowed. "But I didn't lose everything either," she added. That sentence carried more weight than she intended, because it revealed what this had been about all along. Not just control, not just protection, fear of loss. "I don't know what I was supposed to do," she said suddenly, her voice tightening. "Dad's gone. You are alone." Jason kept saying. She stopped, caught herself. Jason's name hovered there unfinished. I didn't interrupt, because for the first time I didn't want to correct her. I wanted her to finish the truth herself. But she didn't. Instead, she exhaled shakily. "I thought if I handled everything legally, it would be safer." Safer. That word again. It had been used so many times throughout this entire ordeal that it had started to lose meaning. Until now. Because I suddenly understood something I had resisted seeing. This wasn't just about greed or manipulation. It was about fear being translated into control. I spoke quietly. "Emily, you didn't ask me." Her eyes tightened slightly. "I tried," she said. "No," I repeated gently. "You decided for me." It was about fear being translated into control. I spoke quietly. "Emily, you didn't ask me." Her eyes tightened slightly. "I tried," she said. "No," I repeated gently. "You decided for me." Silence followed. Jason stepped closer from behind her. "Enough," he said softly, but not harshly. Not to me, to her. Emily didn't turn around. I didn't want her to get hurt, she said again, but her voice was less certain now. Rachel stepped forward slightly beside me. Protecting someone, she said calmly, does not mean removing their autonomy. Emily looked at her briefly, then back at me, and in that moment something inside her cracked, not dramatically, but enough to change her posture. Her shoulders dropped slightly. I thought I was doing the right thing, she whispered. I studied her face, and for the first time since this began, I didn't see an enemy. I saw a mistake that had grown too large to recognize itself. I believe you, I said quietly. Her eyes lifted slightly. But believing that doesn't undo what happened. Jason shifted uncomfortably beside her. David stepped closer to me now. We should leave, he said softly. We can address the legal follow-up later, but I didn't move immediately, because something important was still unresolved. I looked at Emily again. What happens now? I asked. It wasn't a legal question, it was a human one. Emily hesitated. I don't know, she admitted. That honesty mattered more than anything she had said so far. Jason finally spoke more carefully this time. The court didn't reject everything, he said. They're still reviewing mediation and oversight. David nodded. That's correct, he said. There will be continued review of financial and family arrangements. But those words felt distant now, because the real question wasn't legal anymore. It was relational. I exhaled slowly. I'm going back home, I said. Rachel nodded immediately. I'll arrange discharge and transport. Emily's eyes flickered at that. Home, she repeated softly. For a second, I thought she might say something else. Ask to come, or apologize, or argue. But she didn't. Instead, she simply nodded. Okay, she said quietly. Jason looked between us, then stepped back slightly. Emily, he said gently. She didn't respond immediately. Then she turned slightly toward him, and whatever conversation they had silently in that moment, I didn't hear it. But I could see the shift. Not resolution, but recalibration. As Rachel wheeled me toward the exit of the courtroom, I looked back one last time. Emily was still standing there. Not chasing, not leaving, just standing in the space where everything had changed. And I realized something I hadn't expected. Winning wasn't what this felt like. Surviving was. Outside the courthouse, the air was colder than I remembered, but it felt real. Rachel adjusted the wheelchair beside me. David spoke quietly about next steps, but my mind wasn't fully there anymore. It was already ahead. Back to the house. Back to the space that had started all of this. Not as a prize, not as a battlefield, but as something I needed to understand again. Because what had almost been taken from me wasn't just property. It was my voice, and I was still learning how to use it again. The ride back home felt quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, just quieter. As the car moved through the streets of Dayton, I watched familiar places pass by the grocery store where Emily used to ride her bike as a teenager, the pharmacy where I picked up Harold's medications in his final months, the small park where I used to sit alone after he passed. Everything looked unchanged, but I wasn't the same person who had left this city days ago. Rachel sat beside me in silence for most of the ride. David followed in another car behind us. No one spoke about the hearing. No one needed to, because what had happened there was already settling into something deeper than words. When we finally turned onto my street, I felt something tighten in my chest. The house came into view slowly, like it had been waiting. White two-story structure. Familiar porch. The same oak tree Harold planted years ago, its branches shifting gently in the wind. But what struck me most wasn't the house itself. It was the feeling that it had survived without me being there. And yet I had almost not been allowed to return to it. Rachel helped me inside. The moment my feet touched the wooden floor, something inside me softened. Not because everything was fixed, but because I was still here, still standing in my own home. I walked slowly through the living room, the couch where I had sat when the pain began, the kitchen where Emily once laughed as a child, the hallway where Harold used to hang his coat every evening without thinking. Each space felt heavier than memory, but also more real than anything that had happened in the courtroom. Rachel spoke gently. "We should change the locks," she said. I nodded. "Yes," I replied, not out of anger, but clarity. David arrived shortly after. He placed a folder on my kitchen table.
"Final court order," he said. "Guardianship denied. All emergency claims dismissed. Property remains fully in your control."
I looked at the paper for a long moment, not because I didn't understand it, but because I finally did. "Thank you," I said quietly. David shook his head.
"You did most of the work," he replied. "You stayed clear when it mattered."
After they left, the house fell into silence again, but this time it didn't feel like absence. It felt like space. That evening, I sat in Harold's old chair near the window. The sun was setting slowly outside, casting long shadows across the yard. And for the first time in weeks, I wasn't thinking about courtrooms or documents or signatures. I was thinking about time. How easily it had been pulled away from me, and how slowly I had almost noticed. A soft knock came at the door. My body tensed slightly. But when I opened it, it wasn't police. It wasn't lawyers. It was Emily. She stood there alone. No Jason, no papers, no urgency. Just her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, "Can I come in?" I hesitated, but then stepped aside. She walked into the house slowly, like someone unsure if she still belonged in it. We stood in the living room facing each other. The silence between us was different now. Not legal, not procedural, human. "I lost," she said finally. I shook my head slightly. "No," I replied. "There was nothing to win." She looked down. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said again, but softer now, less defensive. I studied her face, the exhaustion, the confusion, the regret she didn't yet know how to carry properly. "I know," I said. That surprised her. Her eyes lifted slightly. "You do?" I nodded. "But knowing why doesn't undo what it did," I added gently. She swallowed. "I was scared," she admitted. "Jason kept saying you were getting older, that something would happen, that the house would become a problem." I stayed quiet. Because I already knew that part. What I needed to hear now was not explanation. It was understanding. "I didn't want to lose you," she said again, voice breaking slightly. I stepped closer. "I never left you," I said softly, "even when you stopped seeing me clearly." Her eyes filled slightly. For a moment, she looked like she might collapse into the past instead of the present, but she didn't. Instead, she whispered, "Can we fix this?" That question stayed in the air longer than any legal argument ever had. I looked around my home, at everything it had survived, at everything I had survived, and I realized something important. Some things cannot be restored to what they were, but they can become something else. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but we can't pretend it didn't happen." She nodded slowly. "That's fair," she whispered. We stood there for a moment longer, not healed, but not lost either. Just changed. After she left, I closed the door slowly behind her. Then I turned back into my house. And for the first time since Harold died, I didn't feel like I was protecting it from the world. I felt like I was finally living in it again. Not as something to be taken, not as something to be defended, but as something that was still mine to understand. I walked to the window and looked out at the oak tree. Its roots were deep enough to survive everything that had tried to shake it, and maybe I thought so was I. Because in the end, I hadn't just fought for my home. I had fought to remain myself inside it, and I had won that. Slowly, painfully.